a special category for the Jews who don't deserve it, this is clearly anti-Semitic. Critique of Israel's policy has nothing to do with anti-Semitism in and of itself. We argue about our policy. We have very strong controversies, say, over settlements in Israel. And people can have a stance about this. It's natural, it's even welcomed. But if you develop an obsession where you criticize only one state unfairly, then again, you are creating a special standard for the Jews. A friend of mine was a satirist, had a quip on Twitter, and he said, forget the fact that the IDF is the most moral army on earth. It's the only one in the competition. Clearly, it's the only one in the competition. No one is applying these standards to other war zones. So you will not hear about the casualties in Iraq. But if you compare the numbers, how many Palestinians were killed in the conflict since '67? You ask activists in the Jewish Voice for Peace, a Jewish anti-Semitic organization in America, then their activists say, this is from Bedwell, he spoke to them, they say Israel killed millions of Palestinians. Does anyone know what the actual number is?
25,000.
12,000. 25 is from 48.
From 48, yeah.
Since 67, 12,000.
Even let's take 48. Let's even take 48. Doesn't matter.
Just to compare, France killed 200,000 Algerians in 2 years in Algiers' war of liberation.
And how many killed Assad in this Syrian civil war? 800,000 about as far as I know. Only Assad. Just
Yeah. And well, I don't get me talking about Obama's Middle East policy. So this is the clear point. How does it get murky after this? I have two sets of remarks. They're not even remotely sufficient to cover the field, but they will designate what I see as two main areas where the problem gets twisted. First of all, we are all programmed, I guess in Germany, I could have said especially, I don't know enough, but I know some, and we are programmed to look at anti-Semitism on the right. This is understandable, and we have memorial days for it, so this is the easy part, and this is so all over the West. It's also the right that's easily blamed for other human rights violations. This conceals the fact that anti-Semitism on the left internationally is currently far more dangerous. I said this a few times. It was hard to say after the Pittsburgh attack, the terrorist white supremacist attack in the United States, but I did my PhD in American history. Students, and the difference is that anti-Semitism on the right, even in Europe, let alone in America, is illegitimate. That is, those on the right deny it, even when they're lying, or tend to. You have a very small fringe of Spencer, what's his name, or David Duke, that are like outright anti-Semites. They are mostly lone wolves. They have very small followings. There is a larger faction of the right which is latent anti-Semitism and would deny it if you accuse them. While on the left, anti-Semitism is becoming institutionalized. This is, I think, the West has suffered a major disaster from postmodernism. It had completely wrecked the intellectual terrain in the social sciences and the humanities. And generally in the West, you know, with the possible exception of France, where it's just weird, postmodernism is an American thing now, and oddly, it emerged from France, it came back to Europe through America, and so it's not Michel Foucault. It's not Gilles Deleuze, and it's not Jacques Derrida. It's Richard Rorty, and it's first and foremost Edward Said. Edward Said is the paradigm for 4 decades in the university. And now we have become the way for the West to cleanse its conscience from its guilt about colonialism. of course, you can understand yourselves that there is a special German case for this, and we know how it operates, and it's still a source of friction. But generally speaking, the British very easily cleanse their own conscience about colonialism by blaming us for it. And so I was speaking to a French crowd yesterday, and I told them in a metaphor that I think is valid outside of France. This has been a struggle in the whole academia of the West between two views of the conflict in terms of Algeria. The Palestinians have been saying that we are France in Algeria, and we have been saying that we are Algeria in Algeria. That is Zionism a movement of national liberation, or is it a colonial power? And if you studied under the Edward Said paradigm, the answer is easy. People in American university assume naturally that Israel is the guilty party in the conflict, naturally, because they grew up on Edward Said. And this had repercussions in many devastating ways, one of which is that we have accustomed ourselves to what I call the moral kitsch, that the more miserable you are, the more you are right. In the Edward Said paradigm combined with Christian culture, the poorer, the more miserable you are, the more morally superior you are. And this is, of course, a misleading view of the world. I'll get to it in a minute, if we have time to say something about intersectionality. But this is how Linda Sarsour in America became a feminist hero. What? How did we get to that stupidity? She is a supporter of Sharia law and female genital mutilation, and she's a feminist hero. And Rashida Tlaib and Tamika Mallory, who associates with Louis Farrakhan, who calls Jews termites, she's a hero of feminism? What's wrong with you people? I mean, not you. I come from America. It's been very frustrating. You know, it's terrible because people have become their social categories instead of their personality, and only in group terms according to a grade of privilege and victimhood, which is, you know, I sat there. I'm a Jew. I sat there in a class. I could have waved the Holocaust flag like every 5 minutes. We've been the ultimate victim, but now we're the colonial power. So this Edward Said paradigm is producing a view where Zionism is colonialism and therefore considered illegitimate. Now for them it's the paradigmatic form of colonialism, which is a very shabby doctrine in terms of research. And you know, the Palestinians still say Jews go back to Europe. This is from Algeria. This is French people go back to France. Jews go back to Europe. As if we are a branch of a European colonial power and we represent it. We were not. Because, you know, my father was a refugee, as were almost all immigrants from Arab countries to Israel. We always talk about the expulsion of Arabs from Palestine. We don't talk about the many more who were expelled from Arab countries. So this is part of the left, is the academic left. And now we have the left protecting Islam. And so the things we add up with in this nauseating cocktail is that you cannot point at the worst source of contemporary anti-Semitism, because pointing at anti-Semitism is considered Islamophobic. So when they pass a resolution in America, instead of blaming Ilhan Omar, the Minnesota congresswoman who is clearly anti-Semitic, instead of passing a resolution condemning anti-Semitism, they develop a resolution that condemns all forms of bigotry, as if Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are of the same cloth. Now, of course there are biases against Muslims, and of course they are wrong. But under the threat of being blamed from Islamophobia, we are not allowed to point at Muslim anti-Semitism, which is rabid. And if you know what is going on in other parts of Europe, I told the crowd yesterday, I know a very smart, she's a young, brilliant journalist. She has a 5-year-old son, she's Jewish. And he said, there's no future for Jews here. Nobody does anything against anti-Semitic attacks on Jews because it's immigrants. And we're not allowed to say anything bad about immigrants, and police don't do anything, so they don't protect us. So we're going. And this has become, look at Jeremy Corbyn. He calls Hezbollah his friends. He calls Hamas his friends. He is in alliance with the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is the head of the opposition party. So when I told you that on the right, if one is an anti-Semite, say Marine Le Pen, which I suspect is an anti-Semite, in her heart of hearts, she would never say something like that. While Jeremy Corbyn is an outright anti-Semitic and wishes the destruction of Israel and tried to change the definition of anti-Semitism so that the destruction of Israel would not be counted as bigotry. And this is supposed to pass as criticism of Israeli policy. So you have academia, you have the left-wing parties of England, and now it's seeping into the Democratic Party, and Jews are fleeing places like Sweden and like France, and we are not saying anything. Now I'll give you the most blatant example of this, because I wrote this piece for Tablet. Tablet is a young Jewish magazine, internet magazine. They're brilliant. I love them. Alana Newhouse, she's from the Forward. She edits it. Leah Leibovitz, great people, right? Paul Berman, great people, right there. And after I tweeted that anti-Semitism on the left is more dangerous and more institutionalized, they asked me to write an essay. I doubt that they would publish what I wrote because they didn't know what's coming. I just had a talk with Igal Karmon. Igal Karmon is the president of Memory. Memory, if you don't know them, get on their newsletter. It's amazing because they translate Arabic. We don't listen to Arabs. We don't. We imagine them with Edward Said. We don't listen to what they say. They translate from Arabic. And he told me they did a systematic research on mosques in North America, Canada, and the United States. And he said 95 out of 100 preach murderous anti-Semitism. Murderous. It is a religious obligation. They tell their flock to kill Jews. This blatant, this crude, and nobody is doing anything. And he went with this pack of research, which he took from the internet. It's all public domain. And he brought this to Jewish organizations, and they won't touch it. They shamefully, and if I can, I'm going to shame them like they'll regret they ever heard of me. Because it's shameful that these people are saying nothing because they're afraid of being called Islamophobes. If you are more scared of being labeled not progressive enough than of pointing out at the danger when it is real and present, where people are growing up their flock, their children, on the idea that killing Jews is a religious obligation, then you're not fulfilling your obligation. And so after Karmon had a round with all Jewish organizations and they wouldn't touch it, he said, okay, I'll produce a study of all forms of bigotry on the internet. White supremacism, misogyny, homophobia, Islamophobia, everything, and put it in one report along with anti-Semitism in mosques. No one touched that too. And he showed it's amazing because you see the same images, the same caricature, the same everything. And so we have academia, politics, and immigration behind this screen where the whole left half of the political map is giving virtual immunity to anti-Semitism when it comes from Muslims. This is not to say that all Muslims are anti-Semites, and Memory doesn't say that. In their report, they even emphasize liberal imams who preach peace. But this is a minority, and no one is willing to say this. So this is one section of the problem, which I think serious people need to address. It's enough the idea that that not speaking, this is the postmodern paradigm. It's what is political correctness about? It's about, let's not say the truth about society in the hope that the mirror will correct the face. So we're trying to fix the mirror so it doesn't reflect what we don't want to see. And this is what, Swedish police, it's amazing. They said, we don't publish statistics about rape according to ethnicity. Why? Because this promotes bias. What? The truth is racist? Is that the argument? Or the truth should be ignored? So I think, it has become way too easy to pose, to strike moral poses. You just know, you don't have to look at reality, you just have to know the manual of what is nice to say. And then we ignore problems. And these are not problems to be ignored. This is not a uniquely Israeli perspective because, in Israel you would see people who say, well, do Aliyah, come to Israel. We always told you, if there's I don't belong to that group. Because I think Jews should be able to live peacefully everywhere. And indeed, in the end, the indication, Jews always end up to be the litmus test of tolerance, always. And this is from the days of, way before the French Revolution. And the Berlin Conference under Bismarck or something was already debating the Jewish question. And the last thing I'm going to say is, the last section of my talk is about how the conflict plays into this. Because the conflict is the puppet theater on which people project the idea of the evil Jew and its innocent victims. And this dovetails the Palestinian tendency to endorse their own victimhood. So the Palestinians don't come from Christian culture. They also don't come from studying Edward Said, because Edward Said is almost banned in Muslim world. They hate him. But they have their own culture of victimhood. And just now I had this talk on the news in France, and the news in English in France, about the recent Kushner-Trump plan, the Bahrain summit. They are proposing to the Palestinians something on the scale of $50 billion. That's 5 times the money that was dedicated to reconstructing Japan after World War II. This is an astonishing number. And the Palestinians have flat out refused. And I talked to a Palestinian colleague on the radio in Israel, and I said to her, if it was Zionism, we would have taken the money and then argued about the rest. Very simply, Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion took German money right after the war because he was pragmatic. Because he said, we are building a nation and this is what we need now. And they did it. Whenever it was pragmatic, Ben Gurion was flexible. But the Palestinian leadership sees Palestinian victimhood as its major asset. And this has been going on since 1948. What is UNRWA? The Palestinian Relief Agency, Refugee Relief Agency. UNRWA was created to perpetuate the problem of refugees. They refused resettlement. All other refugee groups all over the world are treated through the UN agency on refugees. Yeah. The Palestinians are excluded. There's only one other case. It was the Korean War, I think, in the 50s. They created a special agency for Korea. All other refugees are immediately resettled, not the Palestinians. UNRWA perpetuates the misery, because misery is their card. So they have a leadership who refuses to let the Palestinians emerge from their misery, because their misery is their card. And so what is so hard to explain to strangers who view this conflict through their own fantasies is that the Palestinians will not let go of the occupation. No way will they let go of the occupation. What perpetuates the occupation is the Palestinian leadership. And I had a rude awakening because I come from the peace camp. So I supported Oslo, and then I realized they don't want peace, and they don't want partition. So I moved to supporting unilateralism because I said, let's at least finish the occupation. And then we tried, and we got rockets from Gaza. So Gaza blocked the way. There was already a plan in place. It was voted. Ehud Olmert was voted into power based on a plan of unilaterally leaving Judea and Samaria. And the rockets managed to prevent it. So the Palestinians prevented unilateral withdrawal. Why? Because they believed that the destruction of Israel depends on keeping the one-state solution, in which they believe there will be a majority eventually. So they would not let us out of the territories. And after I was reaching this conclusion based on politics, but I was in a conference in we can't mention this because some of the Arab participants will be killed in their own countries if it was known that they meet Israelis. But it's a very large conference in an Eastern European city, and we meet there twice a year. And I stopped smoking 2 years ago, but until then, I smoked, so it was only me and the Arabs in the smoking corners. I was the last Israeli to smoke. And that's where the most interesting conversations were. So I'm standing there with Bassam Eid, who's a very brave human rights activist under Abbas. He almost got killed for it, except Warren Christopher intervened in the last minute after Jibril Rajoub, the head of the security services, invited him for a talk from which he thought he would not come back. Rightly, I guess, if America wouldn't then intervene. And I was standing with Bassam, and we were both smoking, and he said, "You keep talking about the two-state solution. What are you talking about? We will not let you out." And I said, "What do you mean? You don't want the occupation to end?" And he said, "Who will protect us?" And this is the Fatah people. The Fatah people, their experience is Gaza. In Gaza, Israel left, and the Hamas threw them off buildings blindfolded. Do you think Mr. Abbas is going to risk being thrown from a building? No, he is not. His security services are unable to protect him from Hamas. Hamas was democratically elected, by the way, in 2006. And it's a majority. So he cannot let us out. So this is the structure of the trap. As long as Israel there, he is alive, and he can complain about the occupation. Now I sat with top security people and tried to understand how it operates on the ground, and I can tell you on their authority, at the highest levels, that Israel has covert security operations inside the Palestinian Authority 500 times a year. That's 1.5 average a day. And I talked to, and the Israeli security people tell me, we call Abbas. We said, we have these terror cells. And he said, you take them out. And you can understand why. Why should he be portrayed as oppressing his own people? So we are protecting ourselves too, of course. But we weed out terrorism from under his nose. And this is what keeps him alive. And now, lastly, and maybe most importantly, we keep thinking about the conflict in terms that we bring from Western movements of national self-determination. And so we assume that this is a Western-style national liberation movement, which it isn't. The Palestinian national liberation movement is not like mainstream Zionism. It is much more like the settlers. It is, and the difference is clear, yeah? The mainstream Zionism was not about returning to Israel. It was about Jewish independence. This is why they even contemplated setting up a Jewish state elsewhere. Also, we didn't settle the ancient land of Israel. The ancient land of Israel is Samaria. Because, I don't know if you know the geography, Samaria is the mountain range in the middle of Israel, and then there is, most of Israel is concentrated on the beach plain near the sea, which is around the land of Israel, and which the early Israelites settled the mountains because the shore was where the two big armies kept clashing, Mesopotamia and Egypt. Every few decades there was a war, and you wouldn't want to be in the path of these armies. So we settled the mountains. When Zionism came back, this was settled by Arabs, so we settled around it, not in the land of Israel. Because Zionism is not about geography, not primarily about geography. It's about self-determination. Therefore, its aim is political. Its sovereignty is its aim. When Ben Gurion asked in one word what Zionism is, he said independence. The settlers, on the other hand, want to return to the ancient places where our ancestors lived. This is exactly how the Palestinian National Liberation Movement is, and this is why it has refused consistently any plan of partition. Any plan of partition. Because the whole idea of their national ethos is centered around the right of return. What they are dreaming of is returning to their ancient homes, the villages from which their ancestors come. And this negates the two-state solution, because it means the majority of the descendants of the refugees will come to Israel. So they have a Palestinian state, and beside it there is an Israel. This is why the Palestinians almost never say 2 states for 2 peoples. They say, like Saib Arikat, I heard him lying many times, 2 states living peacefully side by side. Do you notice the difference? It does not recognize the Jewish people. And now that we have his office leaked, there was a huge wiki leak from Arikat's office, 17,000 documents. And we have a letter from his team saying, never say 2 states for 2 peoples, because this means renouncing the right of return. And you cannot do this. So this is why at every turn they rejected the idea of partition, because their national liberation movement is geographical, not political. It's about returning to your village. It's not about national independence. And so the current situation is in a sense comfortable for this leadership. It wants to perpetuate misery, and its way to preserve its security is leaving the IDF there. If there were a possible way to get out of there, I would support it. There isn't now. There would be no Israeli leader currently who will risk having Hamastan on Samaria. I don't know if you ever visited the place, but Israel is 9 miles wide at its waist, 9 miles, if you take out Samaria. Samaria overlooks the heart of Israel, its only international airport. They can paralyze the country from there. It's no leader would ever dream of doing this. But this also helps portraying Israel as the monstrous Goliath, and the Palestinians as perpetual victims. I'll finish with one metaphor because I studied this very carefully. What do you do when your enemy attempts to get as many of its own civilians killed for the purpose of propaganda? What do you do? And I studied this painful dilemma because there was, and this is how it works in the press, doesn't it? There was Laila Gandour. Have you heard of Laila Gandour? A baby, she was 8 months old, and it said that she died from tear gas on the Gaza fence. She had a heart disease and she died beforehand. They were there, they got paid for it. Her parents brought the dead baby in order that they could say that she was killed by IDF tear gas. And then all the press published a picture that looked like the Pietà, baby Jesus. There was her mother with a red hijab holding little baby Laila with all these aunts and uncles supporting her, and it looked like Christian iconography. And this was shown everywhere. Front page of the New York Times. And 2 days later it was discovered through a blog of Abu Ali, I don't know the Israelis name. This is the wonders of the internet. He is an intelligence officer, and he has a covert blog, and he publishes their research he does outside the army. And so he found out all the details about Laila Gandour, and the Hamas immediately took her off from the list of killed by Israelis. And then, of course, that was on page 4 everywhere. A small correction that missed the number. But this is how it works, always. Because the imagery is that we're Goliath and they're David. Well, it used to be until 1967 that we were David and they were Goliath. So this is, I think, what feeds the moral fervor behind Roger Waters and people like that, who apply a different standard to Israel. Okay, so I managed to cover a lot of terrain because I did it in a very succinct way, so I'm sure there are things I didn't explain properly in the floor is open for comments, questions, whatever you like, unless there's someone. Is there?
I would say maybe for a small group and people should just.
Sure.
I unfortunately have to leave in
Sure.
10 minutes because you didn't mention BDS. I mean, not really. So, and as we have a lot of debate here in Germany now, because particularly with our organizations working abroad, it's very difficult to find the right approach. So, do you have any recommendations? How important do you see BDS here in Germany? Because if you compare it to Britain, for instance, we're still at a different stage. But I see, because I work with Muslim communities, I see the influence growing. And I probably object a little bit when you said that it's left wing. It's basically pro.
It's actually fascist.
Yeah.
Islamofascism, yeah. I'm just saying it's protected by the law, but the question is good. Could I have your card first? Because I'll provide you with more info. I just want to say just a quick remark. I was ambivalent about the Bundestag resolution, and I ended up supporting it, I think. But generally, I think that the arena where we should fight these things we should not be shutting people up. We should let even the deranged ones talk. Freedom of speech is a precious thing we have to protect, and the way to fight it is with arguments. Having said that, I've just heard people in France saying, we don't have a legal instrument, so we need one. So I understand that this argument could not be decided on general principle alone. But for instance, I'll provide you with a list that I took here, I didn't print it out, of NGOs that are pro-BDS and are supported by German public money. This is outrageous, I think. On the one hand, saying so, but these organizations, and I was struck when I had my first visit to Berlin on what the effort the German government was doing to promote transparency as a value. All your government buildings look like they're all made of glass. You can see into the Bundestag, but the NGOs say that it's the least transparent government in Europe in terms of following the money because of all those Stiftung. I had experience with the Stiftung who promoted Dialog. But still a lot of money is going into these NGOs. And what this does is, this is the prostitution of human rights. In Israel, if you have an NGO that has human rights in the title, it's anti-Semitic. You can 9 out of 10 times. And you can see the logic, because the Palestinians call their right of return the legitimate human rights of the Palestinians. So it's the legitimate human right of Palestinians to destroy Israel. This is what happened. And they are waging, they are using the language of human rights, as BDS does, read their pamphlets, for a clearly anti-Semitic goal. And this is why I forget your name, the gentleman remarked, is exactly right. They are portraying themselves as this non-violent human rights organization fighting against the occupation. They're not fighting against the occupation. They're fighting for the right of return, and they're delegitimizing Israel at every turn. And this works. And this is the heart of anti-Semitism, isn't it? Because these human rights standards are applied only to us, while the people who are passing those resolutions are like Saudi Arabia and Algeria and Venezuela. And so BDS should be, the tool against it is exposing. They are racists. And we should call them out on this and stop calling this. They are preaching death to Jews. We should call them out at every turn. And this is, it's a specialized field, and I don't specialize in it. But NGO Monitor, they are very good at this. And I was stunned by the list of, after the Bundestag resolution, still German money is funneled into these anti-Semitic organizations, right and left. Now, Israel is a virtual playground for NGOs. Like, every second building in Tel Aviv is an NGO. I'm kidding, but it's almost there. Everyone who wants to appear righteous opens an NGO and floods the courts in Israel with resolutions against the apartheid wall. I'm bringing this because this is the stupidest example is that the apartheid wall. This was a wall designed to give birth to a Palestinian state. This was the Israeli intermediary step towards Palestinian independence, and this is called the Berlin Wall, the Israeli Berlin Wall. It's an apartheid wall and whatnot. So the answer is exposing them, I think. And I think following the money here in Germany is extremely important.
Thank you very much for sharing with us all the information. I wrote actually my university thesis about the resolutions you were mentioning before, the anti-Semitic revolution in the UNHRC. Through my entire life, I had my own discussion regarding this conflict and about this topic. So I want actually to share with you, just in short, an opinion that I have, and that's we do have a case. You mentioned many points that gives us more than legitimation to have a Jewish state in Israel. And we have so many points on having this. I have a little problem if we do present it as we are actually doing pretty well, we're doing pretty fine. We build the wall as first step to have a Palestinian state, and we give them the money, and the other side is just too lazy or even has interest in not developing an idea of a Palestinian state. So in my opinion, it's not a black-white story, and I do think that we can reach all the people that clearly have a wrong opinion with all the right things you were mentioning, the wrong things you were mentioning that they're thinking about. If we do admit kind of a position where we realize that we have also made some mistakes, the Israeli side. And once you go there and admit it and show that you have kind of openness and don't present a wall as a first step for peace, there might be more dialogue and even more understanding for Israel.
Well, I completely disagree with you.
That's fine.
I think that, this ends up with the Jewish Voice for Peace, which are anti-Israel. So I think, first of all, you know your job better than me. I'm intellectuals do a different thing. They are about clarifying things, and this is uncomfortable. No one really likes them when all is said and done. And I'm on the side of hard truths, not about how to sell it. So I think my job is to annoy people, and maybe other people's jobs are PR and how to wrap the message. I don't think Israel is clean of mistakes. It makes many mistakes. I'm against the settler movement. I wrote a book against it, and I think it's harmful. But the minute you begin apologizing, you look, and I think about this PC culture all the way is when you start apologizing, you play into their own hands. So yes, the wall was the first step. The wall was everyone who believed in the two-state solution was happy when the wall came up, except the extreme left, because everyone understood. I remember reading this piece about the real estate market. It said the Jewish real estate market collapsed on the other side of the wall because everyone understood that this wall is the beginning of separation. So it's not pleasant, it's not easy, but it was a step in the right direction, and I think the Palestinian Authority managed to intersect that too. But clearly, we shouldn't be saying, Israel has been at times generous and at times repulsive. That's the truth. But the Palestinians have only been repulsive, and the Israeli public only moved to the right after the Palestinian rejected repeated plans. And it's just a legend to say that the plans were only half-baked. They have always rejected every plan of partition, and always for the same reason, the right of return. And just one of the most striking examples is Condoleezza Rice in her memoirs. Because when Olmert went all the way, including what I think he shouldn't have done, suggesting accepting some refugees and acknowledging the principle, but not granting all the refugees the right of return. He shouldn't have done that because The Palestinians say it's an individual right, and Abbas said, I can't give it up in the name of my people. But he did that. And Abbas told Condoleezza Rice, I can't tell 5 million refugees that they're not going home. That's it. They will not agree to any partition. And it's time we stop pussyfooting around this. It's time we stop. This is the truth. I'm not saying that